I just got off the phone with someone that swore podcast guesting does not work. Wasn't my experience, so I wanted to ask more about that. And he told me he had been on 20 podcast interviews, never got a single lead from it, never got a customer, just crickets on it. And he says, this does not work. Well, I was shocked by that because, in our experience with over 7 years, over 500 clients, over 20,000 interviews, I can point to lots and lots of cases where it works awesome. So I wanted to dig into it. So I pulled up our database, and while he was on the call there, I showed him, I'm like, well, here's all the podcast interviews that you've been on. And he says, yeah. And I'm like, well, what was the rationale behind it? What was the thought? And he goes, I don't know. The agency that I hired just found those for me. And it was interesting. And it was like throwing a dart at a dartboard. These were all over the place. And when I pulled in the numbers that we have on those, I showed them, this podcast isn't even active anymore. This one doesn't even get enough downloads to show up in a database and all of these things. I'm like, it's not that podcast guesting doesn't work. I said, what you prove doesn't work is podcast guessing. Let me use another example here. I could say fishing doesn't work. Proven. I've tried it 200 times, right? I have put my hook in the water. I have used different baits, all the rest of that. And I've never caught a fish, especially not a shark that I was going after. And then you start asking people about that and you say, well, what else was missing there? Well, maybe it was that you were fishing and you didn't have a hook, right? Maybe you didn't have that call to action that would move them from just being a passive listener to an active visitor and an engaged lead. Maybe you were using the wrong hook. Maybe it was too big for the audience you were talking to. Or maybe you were fishing in a bathtub. Maybe it was a swimming pool, Fish are in water, so I just went to water. It's that idea of, a podcast, exposure brings opportunity. And I often say that. Maybe I should put a little asterisk on it. The right exposure brings the right opportunity. There are 1.8 million podcasts out there. The vast majority of them are a waste of your time. If you go on those and don't expect to get results, it's not the right exposure. And if you don't have a system to move them from being a passive listener to an active visitor to an engaged lead, well, then don't be surprised if it doesn't work. I say exposure brings opportunity. It's true, but make sure you have the right kind of opportunity that you're going for. Does it align with your goals? Is this where you want to go? Will being on this podcast get you to the right people, get you exposed to the right people? If people just say, I just want to be known by everybody, right? I want to be known by millions and tens and millions, hundreds and millions of people. Well, there's a way to do that. I don't think it's going to help you with your goals, but if you do some heinous act, I've always noticed that the people that do heinous acts, they're not only known throughout time, but they usually are known by all three of their names. So, hey, if you want massive exposure, get your picture up at the post office. If you're looking to grow your business, grow your brand, then get on the right targeted podcast interviews. Use a system to move people from being a passive listener to an active visitor, an engaged lead. Hey, what you could do could help the world. There's a lot of people out there that would love to hire you. It's just that they don't know you exist. Exposure is your biggest enemy. You're obscure. So instead of doing podcast guessing, make sure you are doing podcast guesting.